Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And, I'm talking about the Air solo projects. So Nicolas Godin, one half of Air, recently came out with a new solo album called Concrete and Glass. I was just gonna review that project on its own, but then I thought, hey, the other half of Air, JB Dunkel, also came out with a solo album in 2018 that I didn't even know existed until a good ways into 2019, well after it'd be too late to make a video relevant. And then I thought, how about I just review all the Air solo albums in one video? They've each only released 2 now, that's only 4 in total, not including soundtrack work. Both of them have apparently done a couple of those on their own time, but whatever, I skipped over those for the sake of brevity. It's been far too long since I've gotten the chance to talk about Air, and given how they're easily in one of my top 5 favorite bands, I think it's only fair they get a more dedicated video like this. Call it a very late odds and ends. So yes, Dunkel and Godin have each released 2 solo albums. Dunkel had Darkel in 2006 and H Plus in 2018, and Godin had Counterpoint in 2015, and now this new one, Concrete and Glass, which just came out last month. I'll be talking about them in chronological order, starting out with Darkel. So before I start, I should bring up some weird inconsistencies with the track listing on this one. Like, I'll be linking the album on Spotify in the description, though for whatever reason the Spotify version mislabels the last 4 track titles and, like, shifts them over. The track Earth becomes Beautiful Woman becomes How Brave You Are becomes Bathroom Spirit, and Bathroom Spirit becomes Bunny Girl. The songs aren't actually different from the original track listing at all, they're just mislabeled, and I can tell that this is the case because the lyrics are pretty direct and drop their titles. So yeah, that's kinda confusing, but whatever. I'm gonna be referring to these tracks by their original titles. But anyway, let's get into this album. Now, sometimes when an artist breaks off the band that got them famous and puts out a solo project like this, it ends up sounding completely different from said band. Kinda throws you off and makes you reevaluate how you want to go about digesting that project. Darkel is not that. Honestly, when I put this on and basically just heard what sounded like a new Air album that I hadn't heard before, it was really refreshing in and of itself. Because I hadn't gotten to hear any new Air material since Les Voyages dans la Lune first came out in 2012. Music for a Museum doesn't really count. That's more like a Brian Eno homage that barely sounds like Air at all, but whatever. Point is, even though this project is not Air, nor is it new, it came out before Pocket Symphony, my initial reaction to it was quite positive. Just hearing Dunkel's voice on new material was enough to lighten my mood. It's just been so freaking long. Now, to be fair, Darkel isn't totally indistinguishable from an Air album. You can still kind of tell it's a solo project. For one thing, the production isn't nearly as layered or interesting or well-balanced as the main albums. It's a fair bit rougher sounding. It also kind of leaned in more on like the pop rock elements of Air sound, with less of the weirder soundtracky stuff. More focused on coming up with catchy tunes than with sound design. Just in general, this is a much smaller scale and more simplistic project than most of the main albums, or a marginally more sonically cohesive but less consistent precursor to their later album in 2009, Love 2. On the whole, I do definitely enjoy this album. I consider it good, but it can be a bit of a mixed bag. Some tracks here are great, and some are alright. And there's one track that just didn't work at all for me. I'll get that one out of the way first. TV Destroy. By far the worst track on the album. The production is god-awful. All these completely blown-out fuzz guitars are not a good match for Dunkel's usually more reserved delivery, and it has all these annoying gasping noises. Not to mention the lyrics have like their corny moments. He's got that TV, he's got that TV. Yeah, that track was bad, but thankfully none of the other tracks hit a point nearly that low. How Brave You Are and Some Men are nice, low-key, heartfelt ballads, and At the End of the Sky is a cheerful little piano rock tune. Though none of these tracks really stuck out as standouts to me, they kind of shrunk on me with repeat listens. They're okay. Pearl isn't one of the catchier tunes here, but it does have some solid low-key groove and nice chord progressions. It is a grower. And Bathroom Spirit is a cool lo-fi instrumental to close us out that's very Virgin Suicides-esque. Definitely captures the core appeal of Air, even if it can get a little repetitive and drawn out. But the remaining 4 tracks here, all great. The opener, Be My Friend, is somewhere between the sound of So Light As Her Footfall and Napalm Love, and the tune it's centered around is really solid and enjoyable. This was a track that got me hyped when it came on, like, hell yes, it's air. Earth is an almost instrumental that sounds kind of like a slightly more up-tempo version of Sonic Armada from Voyage dans la Lune. Great bass line, foot-tapping beats, those trademark air synth washes, and a single line from Dunkel repeated throughout. We belong to the earth, doesn't belong to us. Both catchy and a message I can get behind. And there's two more peppy and lighthearted songs that are much less likely to be found on an Air album. My Own Son is just this unabashedly happy piano rock song that skips along and I could imagine Paul McCartney singing over. Kinda Good Day Sunshine-ish. It's so mood-brightening and catchy, I love it. Got some strong Beatles vibes out of Beautiful Woman as well, like Rubber Soul era. Another fast-paced pop rock tune that really helps put me in a good mood and hit some nostalgia buttons. All welcome in my eyes. And yeah, that's basically it. While Darkel is hardly a masterpiece, it doesn't really offer any big surprises, like composition-wise. It has its clunkers, and the production is pretty subpar across the board. Even on the good tracks, it's still a step down from the regular Air albums. And thanks to all those issues, this is probably my least favorite of the 4 Air solo albums. But maybe I'm just a fanboy for this band or something, because I still definitely enjoyed myself listening to this, and found tracks worth keeping. Can't imagine it'll be for everyone, but I like this project. Enough to get a solid 7 out of 10. Next up, it's Nicolas Godin's Counterpoint. So yes, I went into this one half expecting it to be my least favorite, because I heard the whole thing was inspired by Bach compositions. And I'm not much of a Bach person. Like, straight Baroque and classical music, not my cup of tea, really. I tend to be more of a jazz person. So, you can imagine my shock when I found out that this is actually probably more of a jazz album than a classical crossover. Hell, I think this may have turned out to be my personal favorite of the albums covered here. It was really freaking good. In direct contrast to Darkel, a project which relied on its simple tunes and melodies and Dunkel's delivery to make up for production weaknesses, this album's biggest strengths are its sound design and production. There's so much instrumental muscle and variety going into all these tracks, and all of them really well balanced and satisfying. And yet there's not a single pop hook to be found. These tracks tend to be a lot stranger and meander all over the place without much of a defined structure. But once again, the mix is still easily recognizable as coming from one half of Air. Bach may have been the inspiration, and that is really obvious on particular tracks here, but quite often the Bach influence is actually fairly well hidden, and just sounds like Godin is having fun doing whatever the heck he wants without having to worry about fitting into traditional pop structures. It's kind of like a weird amalgamation of lots of different genres, but comes together in a way that's really engaging all the way through, and hit the spot for me in the same way that a regular Air album would, just happening to be much weirder. There are a few moments that feel kinda off to me, usually the moments where the Bach influence is the most obvious. The opener Orca, for instance, was really cool on first listen, hearing the obvious Bach composition reworked into a blaring Love 2 style rock tune with orchestral flares around it. But it did shrink on me with every revisit as it started to feel out of place next to the rest of the album, which went for a much smoother and more low-key soundtrack-y approach. Second track, Widersteh doch der Sünde, is more indicative of the rest of the album in terms of energy level, combining the orchestral string pads with slow Pink Floyd-esque drumming and vibraphones and the typical Air-style bass lines, keeping everything together, and it all sounds great. But in between this beautiful sound design, you got all these different influences crashing together in a particularly awkward and off-putting way. Some of the chord progressions showing more of the Bach influences make me feel like I'm listening to Air during church or something, which doesn't really work. Not to mention the German lyrics clashing with the French style of composing, the random vocalist swap near the beginning. The first vocalist was not that great to begin with, but whatever. And that moment where the instrumental just randomly cuts out for a 10-second choir performance and then carries on as if that just didn't happen at all. And there's even 2 fake endings to boot. Well, more like 1 fake ending and 1 fake abrupt cutoff. I still like this track, but it's just so damn weird and has too many moments that just take me out of the vibe. First listen, I was like, this is awesome! And then on successive listens, I was like, What the hell am I even listening to? Yeah, I mean, this track almost makes Wonder Milky Bitch seem normal. Thankfully, the album gets back on track and remains interesting in the good way from there. Maybe some other moments I'm iffy on, like the Glenn Gould interview sample on Glenn about redefining yourself in super recording techniques. That was a bit on the nose. And the Italian spoken word stuff throughout Deux? Not Italian? That was kind of distracting too. That track would have been much better as an instrumental. But everything else was great. Club 9 kind of reminds me more of Dave Brubeck than Bach, what with its 5/4 piano rhythms. You know, kind of like Take 5. But still a lovely little jazz piece there. Glenn remained a favorite despite the vocal sample, because that main French horn melody is so nice and uplifting. The closer, Elfe was a nice little emotional low-key moment with music box melodies and hit that kind of MD3 Digital Shades Volume 2 note for me. But the best two tracks were Clara and Bach Off. The former is just this immensely soothing vocal track that feels like it's taking me off to some remote tropical island. Emotionally resonant and instrumentally rich stuff that absolutely helped warm up this February. And the latter is the most off-the-chain and experimental track in the bunch, barely has a structure at all and is nothing but sidetracks, but still remaining really fun and energetic and evocative the whole way through, has great sax solos too. I mean, overall, Counterpoint was way better than I expected it to be. I don't think it quite reaches great for me. It has too many little moments that didn't really work or fit well into the mix, but it comes dang close to being great. I enjoyed the hell out of this thing, and it was great to hear air sound being applied to such a strange and unconventional project. So as such, it gets a 7.7 out of 10. Next up, it's JB Dunkel's H+. So this follow-up, much like Darkel, it does kind of stick to the same kinds of sounds and styles explored in the main Air albums, albeit with more focus on the poppier side. The good news, though, is that this album directly addresses my biggest problems with the Darkel project. The production is way better, properly up to par with the main albums and fully well balanced. Sounds fantastic across the board. The project as a whole is much more consistent and cohesive as well. That said, it also gives me less to actually talk about and discuss. The project can get a little samey. A lot of this project falls into that kind of like slow burn Pink Floyd-ish feel. Same blends of pocket symphony pianos, trademark blends of synths, often glockenspiels as well. And you know, I am not complaining in that department. I do really like that blend. There's just not exactly a ton of variation. And there's a few tracks here and there that don't really add much, especially near the latter half. See Slow Down the Wind, Space Age, Show Your Love. They're a little redundant, even if all of them have been growers with repeat listens. And lyrically, it's not great. I'm not super excited to hear Dunkel talking about being your sugar daddy on Love Machine. And on the opener, Hold On, he's saying he will come so high, higher than the sky. Phrasing? I have no idea if that was actually on purpose. Thanks to his accent, he pronounces like the words daddy and darling in a very similar way that's surprisingly easy to mix up. So maybe I missed something. It doesn't really have the sound of a sex song, but all that aside, he keeps delivering solid tunes with great melodies and chord progressions. Hold On, for instance, still turned out to be one of my favorite tracks. Not only is the tune catchy and memorable, but his delivery is so happy and uplifting, it's hard not to get caught up in that energy. Also liked the thumping but sparkling beats of Transhumanity, and the low-key ethereal mix of bongos, pianos, choirs, and tiny little xylophones on In Between the Two Moons. He also includes two instrumentals, the excellent and cinematic Qwartz, and the less standout but still emotionally satisfying low-key explorations of Ballad nonsense. And I also have to highlight that the last two tracks, Carpet Bombing and Kill For You, are apparently bonus tracks that are on Spotify but taken off most physical versions, which they really shouldn't be because they're two of the best tracks on the album. They got some real energy to them that helps make them stand out from the other tracks on here and once again have some really solid hooks. I guess he thought they didn't fit as well into the sound of the album or something, I don't know. But both are great tracks, and Kill For You is actually a really satisfying way to go out. But, yeah, that's basically all I have to say on the topic of H+. May not give me much to say, but I'm definitely hanging on to it, and I can definitely recommend it. The stuff that's good here is really freaking good, and the stuff that's not as good is still perfectly fine. If you're looking for some low-key, well-textured synth pop leaning on being a bit sensuous and, a bit sexy, then you got it here. Thumbs up on this. 7.5 out of 10. And finally, the new one, Nicolas Godin's Concrete and Glass. So, I was pretty excited for this project, seeing all the guest features on here and having really enjoyed the teaser single he put out called The Border. It had me ready for this to be my favorite of the 4 projects here, and it wasn't. I still think it's good, but I was surprised to find this project is actually the least Air sounding of all of these albums. Well, it doesn't not sound like Air, still very smooth and textured down-tempo arrangements, but the mix is so much less organic or warm. It's scrubbed so clean all the way through, and most of the synths have kind of like a synthwave-y feel to them. Not to mention all the guest vocalists bring a really different flavor to the project that maybe threw me off a little bit. It's a lot more structured and cohesive than Counterpoint, but it's not as textured or interesting. If you hadn't told me this project came from one half of Air, I might have been able to guess, but not confidently. It doesn't really rely on the kind of instrumental flares I usually associate with them, besides maybe the bass lines. That in itself isn't necessarily a problem, though. Nice to get something a little different, and he still puts together compelling arrangements out of these cleaner sounds. If I do have a more clear issue with this project is that, I didn't really care for a lot of the guest singers here. Or at least the tracks with them on it. Like, unfortunately, most of these features just aren't that interesting. We Forgot Love, for instance. Kaja Bonet's appearance is perfectly fine. Sorry for butcher pronunciations as per usual. But the instrumental behind her is rather dull and repetitive. Well, so I guess the problem isn't really with her specifically, but, you know. Time on Your Hands was also kind of a disappointment. Given it features Kieran J. Callahan, I thought it was going to be more interesting than it turned out to be. I guess it's still cool. He's got a tiny bit of a Bowie-ish quality to his voice, and the instrumental is nice and laid back and even has some subtle guitar solos. It's a grower, but not really a big favorite. And there were performances themselves that I wasn't big on either. Not really a fan of Cola Boy's voice in the beginning of The Foundation, even if the instrumental is solid and even a little funky. And something about Alexis Taylor's performance on Catch Yourself Falling didn't really work for me either. Kinda hard to put my finger on. And the song's just kinda boring, I don't know. I know it sounds like I thought this project was really mediocre and a letdown by this point, but there were a lot of tracks I really liked here too. The one track on here with a featuring credit that did really stick out to me as great was Back to Your Heart with Kate NV. The tune is catchy and her performance is really emotive and helps bring this track to life. Definite standout there. But most of the standouts here were the tracks without featuring credits. My least favorite of those is probably Turn Left, Turn Right, because it's got a GPS voice throughout it. It's kind of gimmicky, but he also covers it in vocoder. That is interesting. And the instrumental has time to get all orchestral, which I am game for. He turns an iffy idea into something compelling. And all the other tracks are solid. The title track is a cool proof of concept for this new, sleeker sound he's exploring. The Border still holds up as one of the best tracks here, with its layers of glassy planking synths and smooth vocoders, creating this mild but vaguely futuristic vibe that does in fact evoke imagery of, like, the postmodern architecture that seems to have inspired this album. And the closer, Cité, Radieuse, or however you say that, it's a satisfying way to go out, with its layers of sprightly synth plucks creating a bit more energy and build-up, not to mention it's changed up near the end into this super smooth jazz composition complete with piano, vibraphone, and sax solo. Great freaking stuff. But the honor for best track I think probably goes to What Makes Me Think About You. I was getting like some Premier Symptomes vibes off of that one, just this low-key but heartfelt ballad a la Les Soleils Près de Moi, but with these heartwarming chord progressions that are really freaking nice. So yeah, That's Concrete and Glass, and, well, okay, it's not exactly great. This project is like just the definition of easy listening. It's super polished and low energy the whole way through, seems to want to soundtrack a vacation by the beach. Compared to Counterpoint, it was a letdown, not nearly as strange or experimental or risky, even if it does come together as a whole much better. But I still enjoyed it. There were enough standouts here that really stuck with me and feel like the kind of thing I'd want to go back to, and even the worst moments here are still good as like pleasant background music. It's certainly not going to be on the year-end list for 2020, but it is a good project. It's worth giving a shot. I'm overall feeling a solid 7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.